Hey there, my name is Alex, I am the Silver Mont, and this is my review of Nioh for the PlayStation 4. Quick disclaimer time, this video is not sponsored or endorsed in any way. I bought the game with my own money. I've been playing on the PS4 Pro and at time of writing I've completed the game once and put around 80 hours into it. So what is Nioh? In a nutshell, Samurai Souls. It is Dark Souls in a Japanese samurai setting. If I were to briefly explain the game to somebody who had never played it but was familiar with the Dark Souls franchise, I would call it a Souls clone. But not as to do it any discredit, but rather because that summarises many of the elements you will find in Nioh. It is an action RPG where dying or resting at a checkpoint respawns all the enemies, and upon death your experience remains at the spot where you died. Almost all of your player actions are determined by a stamina meter known as Ki. The levels are intricate and full of shortcuts, bosses and enemies who will brutalise you in seconds, if you let them. There are many comparisons to draw with Dark Souls, but that's not to say Nioh is an uninspired ripoff, so let's look at it in more detail, starting with the story. Nioh means benevolent king in Japanese. In Buddhism they are akin to guardian spirits, representing the oldest, most powerful of the bodhisattva, and in more simplistic terms can be used as a title to honour great warriors. And the game tells the story of an Irish-born Englishman, William Adams, loosely based off the historical figure of the same name. The first English samurai, who in this game has the power to see spirits. The game kicks off with William having his own guardian spirit, Saoirse, stolen from him by an alchemist, Edward Kelly, who seeks to use Saoirse's power to locate Amrita to his advantage. Amrita you could think of as the Nioh equivalent to souls. It is both the currency used to level up in the game and from a story perspective a mystical energy, highly treasured, highly dangerous. As it happens, Japan is overflowing with Amrita, and this is where Kelly makes for, with William in hot pursuit. From there the story tracks William's adventure throughout Sengoku era Japan, where he interacts with such famous historical figures as Ieyasu Tokugawa and Hattori Hanzo, to name but two. If you've played Samurai Warriors, Nobunaga's Ambition, or any of the countless other games set during the Sengoku era, you'll probably recognise a lot of characters and names here. The story of Nioh is fairly easy to follow, and the cast of characters were diverse and interesting enough to keep my attention. The narrative here is fairly light. You'll get a cutscene at the start and end of some missions, but not all of them. William himself isn't the most talkative of protagonists, and whilst you infrequently have the chance to choose how he might respond to a certain question, you aren't going to be making any big decisions in the game. William has his goal and nothing will shake him from it. There's plenty of background info to be gleaned though. Thanks to Saoirse, William is able to hear the thoughts of the deceased by absorbing their Amrita. So you'll get interesting tidbits from corpses found in the game world, and there's a lot more info to be found in archives that you can browse in between missions. My biggest complaint concerning the story would be the pacing of it. There are numerous occasions throughout the story where it feels like you are reaching the end of the game, but then it keeps on going. Granted, that's still a minor complaint at the end of the day. By no means is this an amazing story, but it's adequate. Aside from the main missions, there are also side missions which provide interesting diversions and sometimes information. I did all of the side missions as I progressed, and it took me around 70 some hours to clear the story. And there's sort of a New Game Plus mode. Once you beat the game you unlock higher difficulty versions of all the existing missions, so you can go through them all again. Story out of the way, let's move on to gameplay. I mentioned that Saoirse gives William the ability to absorb Amrita, but that's not all. So long as she exists, William is able to be reborn. He is free from death. Effectively, this serves as a story explanation for why you can die and be respawned in the game. Nioh is divided into main missions and sub-missions. Each main mission takes place in a large area that is roughly equivalent to a Dark Souls area in its layout. Typically there are many shortcuts, hidden secrets, and then a boss at the end with checkpoints in the form of shrines scattered throughout. Using a shrine heals you to full health and replenishes your magic. It also allows you to level up, summon other players, and, well, do other things too. Getting into the combat though. Whilst it's similar to Dark Souls in its most basic sense, Nioh has a much more advanced combat system, with hints of Ninja Gaiden. Your weapons in Nioh have 3 stances: high, low and medium. High is slow and strong, low is fast and weak, mid is, well, middle of the ground. Mid stance is also the one that specialises in defence, blocking, parrying and wider reaching attacks for dealing with multiple enemies at once. It is entirely possible to stick to one stance all the time if you wish. Don't be afraid to stick to one stance at first, but eventually you'll realise that swapping between them is the best way to get the most out of the game's combat system. Example, you might bait a large yokai enemy into attacking, dodge away from the attack in low stance and then unleash a powerful overhead attack in high stance, before swapping back to low stance to flip over the enemy, put yourself in its blind spot and unleash a quick combo, before darting away. All of the stances are good in their own way and the game is really satisfying once you get it all down. Managing stamina is so much more important in this game than it is in Dark Souls. So how about weapon variety? Nioh has the following weapons: katana, dual katana, spear, axe and kusarigama. That's a chain sickle for that last one. Well, that's melee weapons anyway. There's also the bow, rifle and cannon for ranged weapons. There's also the option to go barehanded if that's your thing. You might be thinking, 5 weapons? That's not very many. And if you look at it from the perspective of Dark Souls, then no, it isn't. But it makes a lot more sense to look at it from the perspective of, say, Ninja Gaiden or even Devil May Cry. Whilst in Dark Souls each weapon type has, 4-5 attacks, weapon types in Nioh have around 20 attacks and a lot more depth to them. You can equip 2 weapons and 2 ranged weapons at a time and swap between them mid-combo, which is very fun. There are also skills to equip to your weapons, and this is how you expand their moveset, and it can drastically change how you use them. For example, you can unlock a skill that allows you to use your spear to trip enemies, knocking them to the ground. Or there's a skill for the katana that lets you charge up a quick draw style attack for high damage. Or if you really want to show off, a skill that allows you to catch an enemy's weapon, or with your bare hands, and turn it back on them. Besides the melee weapons and ranged weapons, you also have ninjutsu and onmyo magic as your utility options. Ninjutsu specialises in throwing bombs, shuriken, laying traps, poison for your weapon, medicine to enhance your own abilities, and so forth. Onmyo, on the other hand, well, it's magic. You can heal yourself, wreathe your weapon in flames, slow down your enemies, and so forth. The final element of combat would be the living weapon mechanic. As William seeks to free Saoirse, his own guardian spirit, he will be possessed by many others throughout the course of his journey. These guardian spirits grant you passive buffs and will guard your body if you die, meaning that you lose their protection and have to run back your body to retrieve them along with your amrita. Alternatively, you can call them back to you and lose the amrita they are guarding. And as you fight and absorb amrita, you will fill your living weapon gauge. Once full, you can command your guardian spirit to inhabit your weapon, imbuing it with elemental power for a short time, and also making you invincible. Think of it as a super mode. Each guardian spirit also has a unique attack that can be done in one of 3 ways: whilst living weapon is active, or using an onmyo spell, or a consumable item. Speaking of which, you'll find plenty of those in Nioh too. Defensive items that cure poison or increase the amount of amrita you obtain, and defensive items such as bombs and talismans that work like disposable magic spells. There are a lot of guardian spirits to choose from too, perhaps 30? There's sharks, tigers, dragons, phoenixes, rats, bats, cats, everything you could imagine pretty much. Outside of combat, you'll have smithing options such as re-rolling the stats on your weapon, increasing the level of your weapon, and even changing their appearance. Nioh uses a Diablo-style loot system, you see. As you fight enemies, you'll receive hundreds of loot items ranging from blue to yellow to purple in terms of rarity. And who knows, maybe there's another level of rarity even above purple. The system is good and bad. On the one hand, it means you'll always be getting new gear, and it is kind of fun to kill a boss and watch them explode into, like, purple gear. On the other hand, it slightly removes the point in thoroughly exploring every area, because all you're really gonna find most of the time will be consumable items that you probably won't even need once you're like 20 hours into the game. All in all though, Nioh's gameplay is great. The combat is fun, responsive, fast, deep, and has amazing scaling in terms of difficulty. How about online elements though? Whereas Dark Souls has bloodstains that allow you to see how other players died, Nioh has revenants that function in a similar manner. In effect, you will find a grave of another player and it will say, for example, Grave of Diamond X, beaten to death by Doug, and that will let you know that Doug is lurking. But that's not all. If you interact with the grave, you can summon the revenant of that player and duel with it. It won't be controlled by that player, only by the AI, but it's fun. Vanquishing the revenant will give you a chance to obtain some of that player's items. They don't lose the items, it just happens to be the items that were on their body when they died. You also get glory, a currency used to obtain special items, such as the ability to transform into other characters, if you want to change just how your character looks. Then there's co-op. You can summon other players to help you in Nioh. If there's a shrine, you can summon somebody. However, it appears that you can only be summoned to a level that you have already cleared. So let's say you want to help your friend on level 5. You have to beat level 5 before your friend can summon you. They can summon, but they won't be able to summon you until you have beaten that level. Does that make sense? I hope I explained that well. There's also a password system to help match you with friends. Co-op makes Nioh exceptionally easier, because the game is really not balanced around 2 players. You might argue that Dark Souls isn't either, but the difference here is extreme. One of the hardest experiences I've ever had in a Souls game was fighting a high New Game Plus cycle Orphan of Kos, buffed by 2 extra players being present. One of them died immediately, but you know, you do what you gotta do. It didn't help that I didn't have blood gems in my weapon either, but hey. There's also supposed to be PvP coming in April, but I don't really look forward to that because the mechanics, well, there's going to be insanely overpowered PvP builds and it's going to be really gimmicky. It might be fun to do with your friends, but I don't see it really catching on unless they balance it amazingly well. Finally, Nioh has a rotating set of Twilight missions that change every day. These are effectively the main missions but slightly altered, to have harder enemies and better rewards. Personally, this is where I do co-op. I've already beaten the levels at this point, so I'll just summon someone and have a blast destroying it with another player. Oh, I should point out briefly that I had little in the way of bugs whilst playing Nioh. I think the only one that I had, or at least the one that I can remember, was a rather frustrating freeze during the game's ending cutscene. The audio kept going, but the video was frozen. Fortunately, all the cutscenes are viewable in a gallery, but it spoiled the mood some, as it froze right at perhaps the most important moment of the ending cutscene. Right, to finish off this review, let's talk about presentation. Nioh's graphics aren't going to blow anyone away. The game has a visual aesthetic very much in line with Ninja Gaiden 2 and 3, which leads me to think the game is running on the same engine, if not a very similar one. Whilst the game isn't technically mind-blowing, the art style really holds the game together and it's very pleasing on the eyes. That's another way you might compare it to Dark Souls. Lighting and art design do a lot more in the end than high resolution textures and fancy post-processing. There are 2 main modes you can choose for in Nioh, Action Mode and Movie Mode. Action Mode is 60 FPS and lower resolution, Movie Mode is 30 FPS and higher resolution. I was on PS4 Pro, so Action Mode meant 1080p 60 FPS, and that's fine with me. It's of course up to you, but I would highly recommend Action Mode for this game. Gotta give credit to the devs for letting us choose. There's also a Hybrid Mode, which tries to give you as high a frame rate as possible, but I'm not about that kind of thing. As for the soundtrack, there's some nice tracks in there, and the game has a very cheeky mechanic wherein it'll gradually start playing tense music as your health goes down, as if you needed the extra pressure. I gotta knock a point off though, because the game doesn't have a remix of Tadakatsu Honda's Samurai Warriors theme. Come on Koei, what are you doing? In summary, I'd call Nioh a Dark Souls clone, sure, but I don't mean that in a bad way. Nioh has taken some of the elements that made Dark Souls great, and improved on them. At the end of the day, I'd say Nioh has much better combat than Dark Souls, but the story and atmosphere are lacking in comparison. Nioh also has a slightly aggravating lack of level diversity to me. Probably 80% of the game takes place at night in temples and shrines. I know it's based in the real world, so perhaps it's unfair to compare, but Dark Souls has the level variety advantage. Enemy variety in Nioh isn't huge, but I never found it a problem. In fact, I was disappointed I didn't get to fight more human enemies. I enjoy fighting them the most. Just like in Dark Souls and Ninja Gaiden. Maybe that says something about me that I enjoy smacking human enemies more than monsters. Hey, that said, there's nothing quite as satisfying as finishing off a demon in Nioh and then removing all of its limbs post-death, just to prove your point. I'm violent, okay? That's Nioh though, I love it. If you have a PlayStation 4, get this game. If you don't have a PlayStation 4, well, now you have 2 reasons to get one, Bloodborne and Nioh. I hope this review was helpful or entertaining. Thank you so much for watching. See you next time.